Hi everyone. In this lecture or video, I will be giving you an overview of what is required for Project 3, and I'll show you the timeline that I have constructed to help you guys complete this in a way that hopefully doesn't make you go crazy. And then we'll finish up with actually a little bit of a more lecture style conversation that you can return to later on as you're composing your report and working on your Project 3. But I did want to go ahead and give you this overview now so that you have an idea of what you're shooting for. And again, it might be something you want to revisit later on in the process as you're actually working. But let's go ahead and get discussing that right now. So the project itself is going to require you to compose a professional report. And the subject of that report is yet to be determined because before you decide what you'll be writing about, I want you to conduct some primary research to get a sense of the interests and needs of your audience, which is your fellow students. So one of the reasons that we're doing this project is because often as a professional writer, regardless of what context you're in, regardless of if you even have that job title, so professional writer, blah, 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 just in life, you will often need to compose pieces that take information from a population and put it into a report kind of form. So let me just give you one example. In the English department, we are doing a revision of our first year writing curriculum. And part of that process has been surveying the entire faculty about their values about writing and what they appreciate about the current curriculum, what they hope to see, what their interests and needs are. And we are going to analyze that data and then write up a kind of report to help guide our process of revision. So this happens in so many different fields. I'm going to let you guys have a chance to do that in this project and turn it into something that you'll be able to point to, for example, as a piece of writing you've done in your college years that matches potentially the kinds of writing you'll need to do in the field. So you could put this in a kind of portfolio if you so chose. So you're going to ask your fellow classmates about their interests in the professional world, and that can be wide-ranging. It doesn't have to be about professional writing specifically, but it could be. So once you've gotten an idea of what they're interested in, you're going to compose a report that informs them of the, quote, state of the field, or that has some kind of objective that meets their needs. So the report that you compose will be published as a web page, and we're going to be using Adobe Express, which is something that you started getting your feet wet learning last meeting. And you do not have to use Adobe Express if you don't like it, and it is cumbersome. There are parts of it that are a little limiting, but it is a relatively easy one to learn. So you're welcome to use any other site that you're familiar with, Wix, for example, anything that you're familiar with and want to use. But that webpage is going to address the audience of your classmates, inform them about some kind of a trend or a problem or emerging opportunities in some kind of category of professional writing. So I say professional writing here, but I'm going to open it up to professional life in general, though it would be interesting if you find that your audience is interested in the field of professional writing, you can probe them for that. And finally, you're going to make recommendations about how to best position oneself for success in that field. So how are we going to do this, and what is going to be the process? Next week, you are going to conduct primary research to understand the professional needs and interests of your fellow students. And you're also going to ask them about the actual preferred communication style. So I think that actually week 9, maybe when you design that interview, week 10, they actually take the interview. I'm not exactly sure. In the next slide, we'll look at that more specifically. But you're going to be designing not an interview, a survey that gets their thoughts on paper. Then you're going to analyze that information, the survey data, and you're going to start doing some research whether that's secondary research using databases and Google searching and professional sources, or you could conduct interviews with folks that are in a particular field or that have expertise in the things that your classmates are interested in. You can use GenAI as a part of this process as well. Once you have completed your research, or as you are working through it, you are going to begin to develop a focused set of takeaways that you want to communicate in your report. So I'm being really vague because I want you to let the research and the needs of your audience kind of develop, or I want your aims to develop out of the research and out of the needs of your fellow students. Once you've found some takeaways, you're going to compose the text of your report. You may want to use GenAI to assist with this. And then if you do use GenAI, of course, you'll need to revise quite a bit. Or if you did not use GenAI, you might consider using it as part of the process to revise. But remember that as you write this report, you're not just getting the takeaways. You're hoping to hit that tone, that specific style that your fellow classmates want to hear. So in the same way that a company has a brand style guide, the way they communicate with their customers, I'd like you to kind of develop a style guide for communicating with your fellow students. What is the tone that they would like to hear? And that's part of what you're going to be asking them in that survey. You're also going to be designing a unique visual representation of some piece or pieces of data. So I will show you in the next slide when we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But simply because you have some data from your peers, and also because you will have done some research in whatever issue you are focusing on, you'll have a lot of different kinds of information. And one of the ways that we communicate information in the professional world, and in many worlds, though not, often not literature essays or literature papers, is through visual representations of data. So I want to get you on board with sort of trying out what that is like to use these kinds of visuals alongside your written compositions. And then finally, you'll put it all together in a web page, and that is your publishing format for the project. So this sounds like quite a lot, and it is, but don't worry. So you're going to have some clear takeaways and recommendations about the current state of some professional writing subfield or some kind of evolving problem. Again, I'm going to be flexible on this. I want this to be relatable and important for your fellow students. So, professional writing is a giant field. Be a little loose and creative with this. Your takeaways are going to need to match the needs of your intended audience, though, and that's why you're beginning with this survey. You'll want to have reliable evidence from secondary sources that supports these takeaway and recommendations. You want to have a logical structure that's appropriate for a web page report. You're going to have at least one visual representation of data. You're going to have that final web page and a separate works cited page crediting any sources, and 3 additional deliverables: the analysis. I think I'm not sure if there's a peer review report, but I can look at that later on. That's not something I actually included in this. Oops, sorry. Okay, so here's our timeline. Week 8, that's this week, you're going to start becoming a little bit more familiar with the professional writing landscape, and you're going to be learning about designing surveys and some of the principles of analyzing them, also just primary research in general, some of the basics of that. If you haven't thought about that or learned about that in the future, it'll be a primer on it or a refresher. Next week, you will actually design the surveys, and you're going to distribute those surveys on a group discussion board. And you're going to refresh yourself on doing database research and then thinking about it from a more professional context rather than a more literary academic context. Week 10 is the time when your group mates, and there are 8 folks in that discussion board, they're going to actually take the survey. And so you'll be waiting for the data to come in, but that time is going to be perfect for you to think a little bit more about data visualization. I'll have a little lecture on that, and you're going to have a tutorial about how to create infographics using Adobe Express. Again, you're welcome to use any platform you'd like, but this is a very accessible one. It's free to you through the school, and it's pretty easy to use. Finally, on week 11, you're going to actually analyze that survey data. So it's a kind of long process, so you might not really be able to start doing much focused research until this time. So there's a lot of learning, a lot of thinking, kind of taking our time going on here. But you will start determining some foci for your research, and you'll start conducting that research. And you'll at least be able to create, though, the style guide that will inform how you write to your audience, the tone that you use, the kinds of words and ways you want to speak to your fellow classmates. Week 12 is a full week to research. I don't think that there's any homework that week. If there is, it's really just how's it going. I have individual meetings listed there. That's not something I'm going to schedule formally, but I am asking that each of you consider meeting with me, having a Zoom meeting, coming to my office. You'll have to schedule that, and I will make myself extra available that week so that we can talk about, what are the takeaways that you're trying to accomplish in the report, and what are some problems you might be running into. So week 13, which is right before Thanksgiving, is the first draft of that web page, and then you'll have by the end of week 15, you're going to be turning in a final draft. So I'll get you some feedback. I believe you'll have a peer review as well. I think it's at the very end of that week, if not the beginning of the next, that you turn in the final draft. So I just want to give you a sense, and this is stuff off the top of my head, possible purposes, and so what you might want to ask your fellow students these kinds of questions. So maybe the audience is interested in a kind of professional writing job or industry. So maybe they're interested in the field of editing, or maybe they're interested in working in the healthcare field. So the sorts of questions you might ask as you do research are there actually jobs to be had in this field? And if there are, what kinds are they? Do you have to do entry-level work for a long time? How long do you have to do entry-level work? What should one do to secure this kind of job? So there might be some sort of frank recommendations you have for people. If a lot of folks are really interested in the publishing industry, you might need to really give them some pretty clear takeaways about what life like that might mean. Maybe you want to learn more about the features of the kinds of jobs you might get as a professional writer. So is there an issue with getting benefits in this industry? Is there some kind of problem in this area? Is there a new burgeoning solution that you might that your research might uncover? So what are the different models of being compensated? What should someone negotiate for or look for when it comes to employment in these kinds of fields? Maybe folks are interested in, okay, well, I know generally what these kinds of jobs are, but I want more information about the actual specific duties that you might have in a job like this. So if you're someone who writes sustainability reports, well, what does that look like? What is your day-to-day? What kind of writing will you be doing? How much writing will you be doing in a day? So maybe they're looking for some specifics, or maybe they want more information on a particular kind of writing in professional writing. So maybe they want to know more about like manual writing, policies. Maybe copywriting is really interesting to them. And so you want to talk about educating them the principles of writing in this specific way. So some takeaways that they can have for if they want to improve in this area or learn more. But at the end of the day, I want you guys to get unique. I want you to ask some interesting questions in your surveys. I want you to think outside the box as you are analyzing your data. And I do also want you to let your research process, as you start asking questions in the database searches, as you start reading literature in the field, as you start using some of these more professional sources, I want you to really think creatively and look for something that your classmates will be interested in and that will be actually useful for them as they consider all of their possible employment options, as they consider what the landscape of professional writing looks like. So let's talk a little bit about the concept of a report. And we've done reports potentially a lot in our lives without maybe knowing that. We did book reports, which were very summary based, right? What is the information when we were younger? And we have moved away in our schooling from writing reports, because reports are information dissemination really rather than argumentation, though there can be some overlap. So Report, according to Writing That Works, the book that have been using in this class, is used to refer to hundreds of different types of writing communication, but it defines report for the purposes of professional writing as an organized presentation of factual information prepared for some audience. So you may be making a kind of argument with your facts, but you're trying to show that something is going on, that there are some real stakes in the world that your audience might not know about. So just kind of taking a look at the difference here. There is a pretty big difference in the purpose. You're getting information about something that exists versus hearing a clear argument. And this is something that's not going to be read really in a fine-grained kind of way. It's going to use a lot of headers. It's not going to have one of these formally attached to it. Now, a web page that you use might have links to the information that you've used. It might have a kind of sources documented at the bottom, but it's not going to have a formal bibliography. You're going to have really short, concise paragraphs. It shouldn't all be bullet points, but you need it to be really reader friendly. And here's where I'm asking you to bring in those visual representations of data. You want to have some graphics. And I don't think I'm going to ask you to do an abstract, but I will ask you to consider having this recommendations section. And so you can see that this is pretty different from what we're used to writing in the English major. So more tips and tricks from our book. A report that's informal. We're going to do an informal report because we're not, having some sort of specific intervention about a workplace issue. This is going to be relatively informal. It runs from a few paragraphs to a few pages. And what you're doing is working on including the essentials here. And as you saw, it's something that readers often scan. So you obviously want an introduction, you want a body, you want conclusions, and you want recommendations. This looks generally similar to what you do in a sort of elementary type student essay. But let's talk about how the parts differ a bit. So your introduction doesn't just kind of set the stage and then offer your thesis. It actually gets most of the information out of the way in a very quick manner. So it announces the subject, it announces the purpose. It talks about the people who assisted, that this might not be as important for your particular context because you're not actually in a workplace. But it's going to describe the scope. So you want to say, this is what this report is intended to do and what it's not intended to do. So you're limiting it. You're giving the essential background. So the intro might be more than one paragraph, and it's going to do this. This is like your thesis statement, but slightly different. You're going to concisely summarize all of the findings and your recommendations. There's no real surprises in the body. It's going to be an organized account of the report's subject and reminding you that there should be images for folks to look at. And these should, in some cases, serve to be interesting, but also in other cases, hopefully, serve to actually clarify the concepts. So you should be finding ways to give your readers another way to understand the information, especially if there's like a lot of breakdown of numerical information is great displayed as visuals, but it could be something as simple as giving a series of icons to demonstrate the types of work that might exist in a particular field or the types of skills that you might need. It gives folks a way to quickly apprehend the topic and then move on even faster. Your conclusion is a place to summarize your findings, but again, avoid redundancy. Though I like this part, it suggests what about the findings is significant for your audience, and it also might do the following thing: make a judgment, issue a call to action, or suggest ideas for further action. Though you want to be clear not to go outside of the scope of what you talk about too much. So another way to look at this is, another layer to this is that you're not just writing a report, you're writing a report that's going to be housed online. So remember that this just increases your need for this to be audience friendly. Web audiences are going to be scanning your information. And so the way that you want to organize web page content is to facilitate that quick scanning. So you don't want to compose pages that give you big, giant chunks of text, but you do want to create some sort of visual interest that makes folks want to linger on your page and actually get more information than they would otherwise. This is a way to just make the information easy to access, which is why I'm having a real emphasis on visuals. And this is a time, not only is a report a good way to turn to the inverted pyramid, but online composing is a space where you want to use that inverted pyramid. And the inverted pyramid is a structure of writing, and it's used often in journalism, where instead of the way I would describe maybe an argumentative essay, it's kind of like a big idea, and then you've got this rounded middle full of like dense information where you're really doing your argumentation in the body paragraphs, and then kind of a brief end. This is really top heavy. So you notice that the introduction of a report includes a lot of information, and then it kind of slowly goes down. So this doesn't fully represent the way that your report is going to function, because you will have information that you need to spend some decent amount of time on as you work through it. You might also want to use a series of separate pages, but again, you're introducing it in a way that folks can get a lot of information and then easily navigate through the rest of it to get the more detailed parts. So finally, this appears in Writing That Works, and it pertains to their chapter about composing for online audiences. But you'll notice that this is the exact same advice that we began this class with. So readers are looking for useful content in a hurry, and they value conciseness. So these are more or less parallel with the way we've been thinking about writing professionally. You want to cover one idea in one paragraph. You want to start each paragraph with a clear topic sentence. And this kind of goes back to the Williams and Bizup style guide, where they say that exact same thing. You want to limit each paragraph to 3 or 4 sentences. This might vary a little bit, but again, you're trying to keep this readable. You have these shorter sentences, simpler structures with your concrete nouns and active verb, and you're using plain language. So if there's one thing, look, I'm going to make myself really big. If there's one thing that you've learned in this class, I hope it's that concise writing has clear nouns and active verbs and is not abstract. That's like a huge thing. And it's something that I didn't really learn till later on in my writing life. And I think it's going to benefit you, even if you go on to do academic work, even if you go on to do literary work, even if you go on to do creative work. I think you're going to be a better communicator in all spaces of your life if you really take these things to heart and believe them in your soul. Okay, I've said plenty. I'm sorry for waxing poetic. Please feel free to get in touch with me if you want to talk about this, but you'll notice that there's lots of room built in for questions and for thinking more about this before you have to turn it in.